John Dewey argued that our knowledge of any one thing is dependent on the extent and quality of our capacity to make meaningful connections between it and other things. Knowledge for Dewey, in other words, resided not in the thing itself, but in the interrelationships between things. From what I can tell, at the center of this fascinating new venture is a deep appreciation of Dewey's insight, the importance and power of making connections. In this case, most pointedly, connecting institutions, connecting people on a global scale, and connecting social engagement with the dimensions of human resourcefulness and the aspects of the human spirit that we think of when we talk about the human imagination and human creativity. For far too long, we have tended to sideline those disciplines most closely associated with the creative when it comes to addressing the challenges of the practical. More specifically, when the business at hand is the design of the policies, strategies, and practices that might actually get somewhere in the desperately important work of effective social engagement. We are quite ready to call on the artists to be the cheerleaders, but only after the direction has been chosen. It is time, actually long past time, that we start thinking very differently about who should be at the table from the outset. And it is time that we begin to ask, what might an education look like that focused on increasing the odds that our graduates would be capable of addressing the unprecedented challenges they will face with respect to the quality of our public life and the effective pursuit of the public interest. It is also time to challenge our current obsession with an especially crude careerist version of self-interest as driving higher education. That a financially independent life should be an outcome of a college education is, of course, a reasonable expectation. That is very different from saying it should be the objective of a liberal education. It is also time to make the first question we ask about what we are doing, is it something worth doing, rather than is it something that will be funded. In order to address the challenge of what it might take for a university to seriously address furthering social engagement, I would like to start by focusing on the idea of arts altogether, what they assume about the dimensions of our humanity, their once great and visionary role in the history of education, what has happened to the idea and ideals of liberal arts education over the past century, what it would involve to regain their extraordinary power in this new century, and the critical role social engagement can play in animating that enterprise. Simply put, arts are capacities unique to human beings that, if developed, have the power to transform the quality of our lives and the lives of others. They are considered arts precisely because they are fundamental to enhancing the quality of all human effort, rather than being associated with any one subject area of human enterprise in particular. These arts have typically been associated with unleashing the power of language, the famous grammar, logic, rhetoric, and dialectic. The very special role of language in the activities of inquiry, communication, understanding, discovery, and the ultimate art of them all, the art of the conversation. We now have a much broader view of arts that are fundamental. Those are the visual and performing arts, the arts of making. Whatever the form, they resist being turned into formulas. They are subject to constant improvement, but are never completely mastered. They inhabit a territory where flexibility, judgment, experience, a tolerance for ambiguity, and the absence of certainty are fundamental. Their realization is not measured by how much you know that no one else knows, but rather by being able to take things in, knowing how to listen no less than how to talk, knowing how to look as well as how to present, knowing how to use what you already know in order to see and grasp what you do not yet know. Arts, properly understood, provide what it takes to keep thinking, to keep learning, to resist the seductions of being finished or being done. And at their best, they free us from the tyrannies of unexamined opinions, current fashions, and inherited prejudices. Most of all, they enable us to exercise our power to make things better. The existence of these arts is embedded in the very fact of our humanity, its complexity, its multidimensionality, its awesome potential. The fact that we have minds, imagination, emotion, language, and that our lives are shaped and driven by values, however conscious or unconscious those values may be. But their existence does not automatically translate into being active parts of our lives. They exist only in potential. It is the daunting and heady challenge of education to actualize that potential. One thing is certain. If we as educators don't do it, it isn't going to happen. Equally certain, while the teaching of such arts has periodically held an honored place in higher education, that is most certainly not the case today. Instead of an emphasis on such arts whose very existence is based on seeing the interconnectedness of things and whose application cannot be reduced to any particular area of activity, liberal arts education today consists of a collection of discrete subject matters that are somehow considered worthy of such designation. And that circle, as you know, gets larger and larger and more arbitrary. What separates one subject from another is what defines it and what justifies it. This collection of discrete subject matters, in turn, provide the organizational structure of our colleges and universities, creating the departmental silos that so mightily shape and define academic culture. The days of being first and foremost the member of a community, whether it be that of a college or a university, are long gone. Faculty begin and end their career as members of a department where you were defined by sharing the same academic discipline, and students, after a brief flirtation with membership in a wider community, soon join them. The phenomenal extent of the departmentalizing of education is matched only by the extent to which the model of the expert has come to dominate liberal education. While expertise has had its moments, the price of its dominance is enormous. Subject matters of study are broken up into smaller and smaller pieces with increasing emphasis on the technical and the obscure. We have even managed to turn the understanding of literature into the arcane. I somehow suspect Jane Austen would be something other than delighted by postmodern deconstruction. What the reification of the expert does to diminish our values is as worrisome as what it does to constrain and distance our thinking about the complex, interpenetrating, and multifaceted actuality of things. Values other than technical competence are increasingly viewed as signs of intellectual naivete, more likely to contaminate thought than enhance it. The idea of pure science, as contrasted to applied science, is a particularly vivid instance of this mentality. It's worth noting that such a distinction did not exist until early in the 20th century. Alas, we have reached the point where we can scarcely imagine any other model of intellectual prowess, despite the fact that little more than a century ago, this emphasis on the narrow, the technical, the abstruse, the accessible only to those initiated into its mysteries would have been unthinkable. The most popular lecturer in 19th century England was Sir Humphrey Davy, who spoke to huge crowds about such things as the physiological characteristics of nitrous oxide, the chemical agencies of electricity, and the isolation of sodium potassium. Ben Franklin was in continual correspondence with everyone about everything, whether that meant corresponding with Samuel Johnson about the subject of education or Lavoisier about the discovery of oxygen. The impact of education, of the hegemony of the expert on education has, of course, been huge. The trajectory of a student's education is to jettison all of their interests except one, and within that, to continually narrow the focus instead of being encouraged to try the very things that seem most uncomfortable. To be seriously interested in more than one thing is seen as naive, intellectually immature, or an achievement of superhuman proportion. Breadth has become synonymous with the superficial and depth with the technical and obscure. The aversion to substantive values is most evident in the near religious avoidance of criteria that would discriminate between the relative importance of subjects of study. Everything is equal. No subject is more worth investigating than any other. If you can departmentalize it, you can teach it. We have even managed to sever the issue of the quality of our thought from its substance. One of the reasons critical thinking has become such a popular expression is that it's another way to avoid content. It allows you to abstract the issue of the quality of your thought from what you are thinking about. It further implies that thinking itself somehow lacks heft. I can tell you those are really strange ideas. Meanwhile, questions such as, what kind of a world are we making? What kind of a world should we be making? What kind of a world can we be making are off limits. We have reached the point in the academy where neutrality about substantive values has come to be treated as a very condition of intellectual integrity. And maturity becomes equivalent to neutralizing rather than disciplining one's passions. You may have heard the expression learning more and more about less and less as a way of characterizing much of the current academic culture. In truth, it is more accurately described as learning less and less about less and less. The message is clear. Don't overreach. There are amateurs, in other words, those who know less than experts, and experts. And one had best leave serious work to the experts. In a word, when the impulse is to change the world, the academy is more likely to engender a learned helplessness than a sense of empowerment. It would be hard to imagine a further departure from an education designed to enlarge the resources of our students, to extend the range of their potential agency, and to persuade them of the importance to themselves and the world of exercising that potential. We will have to look elsewhere to find the model we're looking for here. I discovered a new one the other night, and that is to sit next to Christina at dinner. The problem is that not all of us have the privilege of doing that. Probably the next most compelling model is the University of Paris in the 10th and 11th centuries. They centered the work of the entire university on issues of spectacular human concern, such as how to justify the ways of God to man, the conflict between faith and reason. But that was a while ago. More recently, the most powerful examples, excuse me, I'm just going to get some. More recently, the most powerful examples have been characterized primarily by focusing on monumental texts and historical events of equal scale. Essential to both is that the dimensions of the material are such to collapse barriers rather than to erect them. Here, breadth is inseparable from depth. Moreover, everyone participates. These texts, these issues belong to everyone. That's the point. While at the same time, they demand at white heat the full range of our collective ethical, intellectual, and imaginative capacities. But while tempting, perhaps, to imitate, the consequence would be to lose touch with the issues of our time and to evade the challenge of finding new forms. A measure of the distance we have traveled is the fact that if you mention works associated with their monumentality, the presumption is you are advocating an education suitable and accessible only to an elite. Thus we watch what was a truly remarkable, even heroic idea of education, in which excellence and equity converge, dismissed as autocratic and elitist. But that is not going to be our answer. So since we will have to rediscover how to do this, it is worth taking a few minutes to think about fresh ways to define what its principles or defining characteristics might look like. That is, the principles and defining characteristics of an education that we are seeking here. While still an undergraduate, Richard McKeon, a professor of mine, wrote a book entitled Thought, Action, and Passion. I was intrigued by the title then and have been ever since. Why those three things and why together? His intellectual prowess was legendary, so the thought part of the title was easy. But why did he give equal emphasis to action and to passion? It was only later when I began to appreciate the importance of grasping emotion, as I discovered how many people presumed that thought existed absent emotion. More remarkable to me was the presumption that thought or reason was dependent on the absence of emotion. Some idea of thought as disembodied, disconnected from whatever part of us was the emotive, the feeling part, or for that matter, of the body altogether, as if our head somehow sits above the rest of us. What followed from that was the inevitable arguments about how we needed to balance our intellectual side with our emotional side, as if these were disconnected parts of ourselves and more of one meant less of the other. You know, right brain, left brain. One thing I knew, thinking when it happens is anything but disembodied. It is charged with what informs any great effort: energy, intensity, pain, pleasure, frustration, joy. Without huge investments in the value of what it is to really understand something and the capacity for sustained effort, thinking doesn't happen. Moreover, caring about things enough to really think about them cannot exist in an emotional vacuum. The very existence of conviction depends upon passion. That is why, and one of the main reasons why, the way in which we integrate thought and feeling is so terribly important. And if there is any truth about the human brain that is certain, it is its interconnectedness. Here's the point. However much you choose to examine the parts of the brain for purposes of understanding, brain remains first and foremost one brain. And its parts are in continuous interaction at an almost unimaginable degree. Without that interaction, you and your brain stop. My sense of the importance of action came later, when addressing the challenges of what it would take for a college to make enhancing the capacities of our students to advance public action a primary objective. It was then that I came face to face with the intensity and extent to which the academic community lived and breathed a world in which thought was severed from action. No matter what the pressures, no matter what the urgencies of the need to build the continuum, to extend ideas into action, the academy stops again and again at the water's edge. Translating ideas into action is apparently someone else's job. But whose? And how is it possible to continue to presume that effective action is going to emerge from those who are cut off from the most profound understanding of the issues requiring action? And contrary to the commonplace that thought inhibits action, it turned out that the orientation of our curriculum towards effective action did not only fail to sideline thought, it made thought absolutely and inescapably central. There was simply no way around it. The challenges of effective action are gigantic. More often than not, they are overwhelming. The single greatest weapon you have is thinking. Indeed, without it, you have nothing. Trust me. Mindless activism is not action. However savvy the expression, don't just stand there, do something, may seem, the real challenge is, don't just do something, stand there. It is ironic, more precisely tragic, that education, where it is most critical, where education is typically most critical, we allocate it to the extracurricular. And while the dangers of action, uninformed by thought, may be relatively obvious, I now found myself focusing on the disconcerting truth that thought disconnected from the obligations of action is even more treacherous. McKeon was, of course, not the first or the only one to appreciate the extraordinary significance of the interplay of thought, action, and passion. If memory serves, Socrates saw the human soul as divided into these three parts. But McKeon was the one who persuaded me that however idiosyncratic, dated, or impenetrable it might seem, appreciating their interrelationships, really pondering them, might be a way, even an especially illuminating way, to understand what is called for when the issue involves grasping and maximizing our human potential. As I understand it, that is the enterprise we are inaugurating today. So here's what I think. If you are after an education committed to developing our most powerful capacities for making a difference in the world, you need a curriculum that addresses those issues, teaching that emphasizes those arts, an institution that insists on those values that are designed to facilitate and capable of facilitating a vibrant convergence of thought, action, and passion. The so what question can no longer be heretical. In the world we are imagining, the importance of what is being taught matters terribly. And while that means curricular decisions will necessarily be contentious, so be it. What better conversation to be never-ending, never fully resolved, than that concerning whether or not what we are teaching is indeed the most important thing we could be teaching. And not to worry, there are more than enough huge issues that are self-evidently of great importance, urgency, complexity, and in desperate need of being effectively addressed. They have to be issues that are not chosen because of their fit into a taxonomy of pre-existing disciplines. They are chosen because they matter, and that mattering in turn will drive how they are approached. In contrast to the expert, non-expert model of teacher and student, in this world, teaching is building on a continuum rather than traversing a divide. Teachers are not the source of the arts being developed, they are the midwives. Teaching becomes the activity of enabling students to discover and develop the capacities they already have, rather than the transmission of information which of necessity makes central what the teacher has and the student lacks. To be clear, the point is not that not knowing what you're talking about, or that knowing what you're talking about doesn't matter. It actually matters a lot. When the challenge of acting on what you know is part of the deal, The importance of the accuracy, relevance, and thoroughness of that knowledge is enormous. But it is now an urgency that is shared by the student, no less than by the teacher. Not that there aren't differences. What distinguishes teacher and student is that the teacher knows how to be a student. And that in itself is a great art. Indeed, perhaps the most central to this work. How to know what you need to know and how to find it. Education based on the development of such arts presumes that the most important community of which we are a part is the human community in all its diversity. You will discover that when there is a common purpose, diversity of thought and experience is a source of enormous strength. In the absence of a common purpose, it is a source of unproductive tension at best, unproductive conflict at worst. An uncompromising commitment to excellence is absolutely necessary, but so is equity. And it is an education where acknowledging the interconnectedness of things, a truth that stares us in the face of every waking moment, is at its heart. More precisely, is its soul. It is hence a genuinely democratic strategy, a profoundly global strategy, a profoundly exhilarating strategy, and a profoundly demanding strategy. There are for sure many paths. At Bennington, the one we chose was astonishingly simple in conception. To make the great challenges of our time the organizing principle of the curriculum. Effective action was what we made the informing principle of the curriculum, and that meant to direct everything we did to address those issues, to address what it would take to do something about those issues on a scale that dealt with causes, not symptoms, and that was not satisfied with being a drop in the bucket. Flexibility, improvisation, imagination, courage, thinking, rethinking, thinking again, and confronting head-on the question of values are central. This agenda is obviously challenging under any circumstances, even more so with the recognition that the location of authority and accountability turns upside down from what we have become accustomed to in the academy. No one has the answers, and everyone is responsible for finding them. It's messy, radically open-ended, complex. Uncertainty, being overwhelmed, confronting the impossible are its ABCs. But so are remarkable discoveries for students, faculty, and staff of the range and depth of our individual and collective resourcefulness, and most of all, the power of the classroom as an incubator and crucible for developing and using its resources to advance public action. Which brings us to where I began, the leading role that artists have played in addressing this agenda. That is at Bennington. Their capacity for innovation, the importance of values in shaping their work, the habit of exploiting resources around them to change the content and contours of the world, and ease with the open-ended, the uncertain, and the ambiguous. It also brings us to here and to this building that invites you to roll up your sleeves in order to soar. You have faculty who have come and staff from all over the world to do something worth doing. You have students, as we saw yesterday, with boundless energy and limitless talent, and you have stunning leadership. So go do it. Thank you.